to This is Metal with Joe Lawson. My name is Jason J. Rock Houston from Guitarist TV, and our guest today is Lothar Keller. And since Lothar is somebody you know, Joe, why don't you kind of do an introduction and let people know where he's from? Can you hear us, Joe?
Okay, this is a good friend of mine, Lothar Keller, and he's a multi-talented guy. He sings, he plays guitar, he's in band with all the bands that he's in and all the stuff that he's got going on. Lothar, why don't you start off telling us, you just recently got back, I believe, from Europe, some shows with The Skull, correct?
Yeah, well, actually, it was our launch as Legions of Doom. So basically, what's happened is you've got members of Corrosion of Conformity, St. Vitus, Trouble, The Skull, all combined. And we're basically, what we've done is since Eric Wagner passed away, we weren't really sure if The Skull was going to continue. So we pretty much were looking at options to do a tribute show. And when we did the tribute show, Carl, who was the singer on the Corrosion of Conformity Blind record, he kind of came into the picture and has been a longtime friend of Ron, who's the bass player in The Skull and also formerly of Trouble. When we did the tribute show, we basically were like, all right, well, let's see how this goes. And the energy was good. And we were kind of like, all right, I think, we're going to look to do more with this. And we did Hammer of Doom in Germany last year and did a whole tribute show for Eric, as well as the tribute shows we did here in Chicago. The idea of bringing Scott Riegers, who was the original singer of St. Vitus, into the picture was just kind of in discussions to see how this would work. Our booking agent in Germany kind of was like, this would be a good idea. I think this would work because, St. Vitus isn't really doing anything right now, and it would be a good package. So we figured, let's see how this goes. So we're basically Legions of Doom. We did the Grass Pop Metal Fest and we did Hellfest, and we did a couple of warm-up shows leading up to those. Both went very well, and the reaction was great. So I know we're going to be going back over to Europe next year.
So it start out as a tribute project to Eric Wagner, as you said. Is it going to kind of morph into maybe original music, future release down the line?
Yeah, well, see, with The Skull, when we did originally start in 2012, it was just to do the early Trouble stuff. So that's what we were getting booked for. But there was an itch to start writing, so we did. And so when we released For Those Which Are Asleep, and I think it's 2014, and then The Endless Road Turns Dark came out in 2018, we were talking about doing a third record. And we had started writing for it. Unfortunately, the pandemic caused a few delays, and then when we did go out back to touring, we went out with The Obsessed. By the time we got to Texas, Eric's condition started declining pretty quick, and we had to basically stop. Our drummer, Henry Vasquez, lives in Fort Worth area, so we stayed there to see how his health would get back, and it just wasn't going anywhere. So we chose to bail on the tour and let Eric get better. And so we all drove back thinking Eric was going to get better. That did not happen. So our last show with Eric was in Austin, Texas, at the Lost World.
And when you got that kind of talent in a band, it's hard not to want to kind of move on to the next level and want to create original music, I would imagine.
Well, and that's why we did those records, because that's what Eric does. And he had an opportunity to write with me and Ron, and because he was doing his Blackfinger thing, and his last record was just a solo record, Eric Wagner. But we had a lot of fun writing those records, because our first record, we had one of the guitar players that was in Pentagram. The original drummer from Trouble, Ole, was recording with us. And on the second record, we had Rob Wrong from Witch Mountain on the other guitar player, and we had Brian Dixon, who was the drummer for Cathedral for 20 plus
Wow.
years. And that record is quite a magical record, and it was the last thing we recorded with Eric, except for, we all participated. His last solo record was, a bunch of his
Yeah.
friends.
And it kind of makes sense that you guys would decide to kind of, move on to the next level, because you could imagine if you had decided to, call it trouble, Eric Wagner's no longer here, fans, you never know how the fans might react to that.
I know.
Yeah.
It's a tough call. Some people are trying to label us as the real trouble. It's like, I don't want to do that because that's not fair to those guys. And
Yeah.
obviously, I'm friends with them too. So I don't want to tarnish that relationship by any means. And
Of
I
course.
think,
Yeah.
with this idea of continuing as the Skull, Carl is a good fit. I mean, he really does. He brings a lot to it, and he cares. And and we're gonna have some songs with Scott Rieger singing. So
That's great. And in prepping for today's interview, I went online. I was checking out some other interviews you've done recently, and in one of them, you were talking about the fact that your influences are, for a guy that in all these great metal bands. Your influences are quite varied. I mean, everything from Uriah Heep and Sabbath to Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It kind of molded, but when metal got into me, it was there. And I like everything from basic metal to the most complicated. I think the fun thing about metal is that it is a sponge for all genres to come in and be used in
Sure.
some form or fashion, and it
Sure.
makes it more interesting.
And I understand that you also got your own label that you had started with your father. So you kind of are on the both sides of this. You're an artist yourself, and you're giving other artists opportunity to get their music out there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the tough thing has been starting during the time the pandemic kind of hit, but because early releases were always just stuff that I had done. We didn't really start venturing into looking at bringing other bands on until 5-6 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And
what's the name of the label again?
Qumran Records. So if you think of the
How did you
Qumran
come up with that? That's kind of an original sounding name.
Well, the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls are located in the Qumran caves.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So they are technically the Qumran Records.
And now I know you and Joe Lawson here are friends, and Joe was sharing me, but you guys have done you've done shows together. So you want to talk a little bit about that? And
yeah. Man, it's what's fun about the local Chicago scene is when a lot of the friends get together and start playing shows and putting those packages together. Yeah, because like Sacred Dawn, we've been doing our thing off and on for a while, but Divinity Compromise was kind of a project that started with Jeff Treadwell and Vito, who was the guitar player from he's from November's Doom. And they started this as a project that they're like, kind of a Nevermore Evergrey mix. And so that just kind of spawned off as kind of a whole new venture. And all I did was sing in that band.
Oh, wow.
You got two albums out with Divinity, right, Lothar?
Yeah, the first one we did. Actually, what's interesting is the very first single they ever put out, and they put it on the Prog Power compilation CD that came out, and I think it was 2008 or 9.
Oh, wow.
Scott Huffman was the original singer on that first track, who was from Line Warp Chamber. But he wasn't able to commit to anything further. And Vito asked me, "Hey, are you interested in singing with us?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, let me listen to your stuff." And I liked what they were presenting, and I was like, "Man, yeah, I can do something with this." It's right down my alley because, of course, I love Nevermore, I love Evergrey, and I love some of the darkness that was coming with us. The symphonic sounds really kind of started coming more into play when Ben Johnson came into the picture and was doing some of the keyboards. But early on, the early Divinity stuff just basically sounded like raw Nevermore.
So you're involved in all these different bands. So my question there is, how do you know, like, okay, this song will work for Sacred Dawn or Legion of Doom? Is it kind of just depending on what you're working on at the time, or?
Yeah, because honestly, there's several riffs that I sat on. Is like, man, I could use this in the Skull, but the direction I wanted to take it just screamed Sacred Dawn.
And that's the
and,
thing too. Like, I imagine like a lot of people, you initially think, oh, I'm going to be in one band, but being involved in all these other different bands, is it just because, well, I can do this, I can do this, but it might not like fit for the soul, as you say. So yeah, I
yeah,
can do more than one thing.
yeah. I mean, and for me, each band is kind of, they're all different from one another.
Yeah, yeah,
Divinity Compromise is definitely more of a technical progressive.
yeah.
Sacred Dawn, I guess, would be more of your power metal with some old influences in classic metal, throwing some progressive elements here and there.
You released something recently with Sacred Dawn as well, right?
Yeah, we just put a single out. We got another one that's going to be coming out next month. The album release is going to be September 29th.
Oh, wow.
It's the first record, full release record we've done in 10 years.
Nice.
Basically, since I joined the Skull, I was a bit preoccupied. And I also had Divinity Compromise going at the time. Guitar player moved to Florida. Other commitments started changing with people. So Sacred Dawn just had to go into a hiatus. There was no time for it. And it's, nothing bad or necessarily. There was just no time for anything.
Just got to find time to do everything, right? Like I said, I mean, that's the hard part.
It's a tough toss. And so Divinity became an extra focus too. And we played Prog Power. We did quite a few good shows. And then we released our second album in 2017.
Yeah.
I
was watching a lyric video for a song by Sacred Dawn, Truth Be Told, and
Truth Be Told,
kind of a groovy track. I mean, I dig the fact that like I describe it as aggressive metal with melody.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of how I like to look at it. Can't be happy all the time, right?
Yeah. But
it is kind of a gloomy song.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, because the people that are into like metal, hardcore metal, they're gonna love something like that,
Yeah, it's hopefully it pleases a wider range.
So the fact that you're in all these different bands, does it ever get hard like to create a set list?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah. That's but what's interesting is at least with like the Skull, Legions of Doom, now we can create a set list. We kind of try to stick to it for a little bit.
Legion of Doom, that sounds kind of that sounds like something really metal, but I don't know if you're aware of it. There's a comic book reference to that as well.
Yeah, there's a lot actually. Even the wrestler name, which is Legion of Doom. There's also, but we ended up making ours plural because of the complications that it may be.
That's cool. Now Joe, you were
more
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lothar.
I'm sorry. To me, throwing legions, making it plural, kind of almost seems a little more fitting too, because it's legions of several of us.
Yeah. I was going to say, Joe, you mentioned to me that you and Lothar, you guys like had done some shows together in the past. So I was curious, were you aware of him as an artist before you guys did those shows, or once you did the shows, were you kind of aware? Okay, I better check this guy.
Yeah. I mean, I heard him play before we did shows, and I believe Sacred Dawn was the first time I heard him. Yeah. So I was aware of him, and Lothar's a super talented guy, great singer, great guitar player, really talented. I wouldn't want to bring anybody on the show that wasn't, So anybody listening that's not familiar with the stuff, go online, check it out. Sacred Dawn, Divinity Compromise, and now Legions of Doom. Excellent stuff. There's something in there for everyone. Like he said, each one of these bands really does have their own individual sound. They don't sound alike, and they're all very good. So I encourage you to check out some of his music.
And Lothar, I'd imagine it's kind of like asking to name your favorite child. I was going to ask, like, it must be hard to when you're in that many bands to say this is my favorite band or this is one I like the best, because they're all like your little babies, right?
Yeah, they are. I mean, it's kind of one of those deals where it's like I kind of look at each band as a different experience. I know when I go out and do doom metal, it's going to be a certain type of vibe, but I also know it, different crowds too, different friends.
Yeah. And I was curious, were you always a singer, or did you start out as a guitar player and kind of, well, you got the best voice in the band, so you're going to be the singer, or how did that work out?
Well, singing was always kind of something that I just was kind of always just on a second nature.
Yeah.
I really wanted to learn how to play guitar, and that started at the age of like 8 or 9.
Yeah.
But singing was something that I just could do. And when I was in all my music classes in elementary school, the music teacher was like, "Oh, you need to go try out for the boys' choir."
Yeah.
So I went and
Yeah.
auditioned,
The reason I ask, is because different guys have different stories. I've heard Dave Mustaine, of course, talk about how he was the lead guitar player that was fired from Metallica, and
yeah,
initially he didn't even really know he could sing or had a voice, but initially he was looking for a singer for Megadeth, and he couldn't really find anybody that could sing his songs the way he was hearing them in his head. And his
yeah.
manager, somebody told, hey, you seem like you could sing pretty good. Why don't you just give it a try? And I mean, if you never formed Megadeth, who knows? We'd make
Well, I mean, I know, and it seemed like I always actually preferred being just a guitar player at first.
Yeah.
When I was first starting bands, it's like,
Yeah.
I get somebody else to sing, and I would just do backups. I actually enjoy doing harmonies. I love it. So for me, it was always kind of like, just get somebody else to do it. But then a lot of singers were flaky, and I'd end up being stuck having to sing at a gig because the guy didn't show
You
up.
think you'd have a issue of, okay, I'm the guy that wrote this song, so you'd be more critical of how somebody else sings your lyrics?
Sometimes, yeah, yeah, and that goes with even all the other instruments too. I mean, even how a drummer interprets. I've had drummers have been like, "Don't give me anything with drums on it. Just give me guitar riffs." I'm like, "Well, no, because there's a certain groove that I've got in mind."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Well, no, I want to feel it and figure it out." I was like, "Okay, well, tell you what, I'll give you without the drums first, and then I want to hear what you do, and then I'm going to send you what I've got in mind if it doesn't sound anything like what you're playing."
Yeah, because it's one thing what you do in the studio, but then when you talk about playing live, I think you've got one of the hardest jobs in the band. Not just being the front man and the lead singer, but playing guitar too, very much like a James Hetfield type. And so you got to remember all your lyrics. And kind of when the band is up on stage, let's be honest, all eyes are on you. I mean, the guitar player could break a string or play a sour note, but but how you sing the songs and are performing and how you communicate with the audience, that's key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always, I don't know, I always felt like doing live was easier sometimes than being in the studio.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Maybe because the energy levels are up higher, and then it always felt like certain songs were easier to
You
sing.
can feed off the crowd much easier than when you're creating something in the studio, I would imagine.
I think that's a big part of it, because you get overly critical when you're in a studio, situation, and you hear every little thing. But in a live situation, you're just going for it.
And I've heard, especially the European fans that really love their metal bands and stuff. You find that your stuff is popular over there?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's very receptive.
Have you ever had the opportunity to go overseas and play?
I mean, besides Legions of Doom and the Skull, Sacred Dawn nor Divinity have had that opportunity to go overseas yet. There's
Wow.
been invitations, but we haven't financially.
But even those bands, I'd imagine there was a little bit of excitement. Hey, we're going out of the country. We're getting to play somewhere, around the world where we haven't been.
Yeah, yeah, and we're looking to see if that can happen next year.
And I'd imagine even those audiences are a little different than what you're used to here in America. I mean, just for very, very different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, that they've actually had it as a metal is looked at differently. It's considered an actual genre and not some. Yeah, I mean, we can just watch our award shows that happen in this country.
I mean, the problem I think as a metal fan myself, I have with things here in America, a lot of the fans allow themselves to be spoon fed. Like for example, in the early '90s, when we're going to forget about all the metal that came before, and grunge is the latest thing. Okay, so we're going to stop playing metal videos on MTV, and nobody's going to buy the records anymore.
I know. I mean, it's kind of crazy to me that it's even managed to stay relevant. But there are still those diehard
I
DJs
think
out
a
there
huge, I
do it.
think a huge part of that is not just the bands and the music, but the fans. A lot of metal fans. I mean, myself, I include in the list, um, are real loyal to the bands they love. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, especially, yeah, big time.
You got any shows coming up, Lothar? Any local stuff?
Well, right now, Sacred Dawn, we're planning to do a CD release party in October, so we're planning for that since the release is on
You
September
said that's
20,
coming out in September.
September 29th.
I just want to say
Additional song.
before we wrap it up here, Joe and I love to have you back on the show when that's about ready to come out. Because just know you're welcome back here anytime. Because I got to be honest with you, Lothar. Until Joe told me that he was friends with you and he wanted to book you on the show, which I'm all open to do. But I like to go and prep for the show and check stuff out, especially in this case because I never heard of you before. But I was quite impressed with what I heard, and so I got to urge people to go check out Lothar Keller and check out his bands. And that's the thing in prepping for today's show. I got to tell you, Lothar, is even though I wasn't familiar with your stuff, I was kind of listening to that stuff with fresh ears because that way never heard it before, so you can't really judging it for the first time.
Yeah,
And what impressed me about all of it was your music and your bands. They all do sound quite different, and they you don't really sound like any other metal band I've heard before. I can hear some of your influences, but I can't tell people that all this guy does, he's trying to be the next Black Sabbath. No, you got your own. But these bands got their own original sound, and I know that's a very hard thing to do.
yeah, and I try to take pride in the fact that people can distinguish who somebody is. I miss when you'd hear a guitar riff and you go, "Oh, that's Chris Oliva." You know
That's
what I
the
mean?
one. That's one thing I hate about some of those bands in the '90s. Like, we don't do guitar solos. I used to be like, why not? Yeah,
Yeah, I know. Well, it's come back around. Everything has a cycle, right?
yeah.
So that's what's exciting
So,
about it.
anything else you want to say to people out there? Let people know where they can find you online.
Well, okay, so for the record label, and that probably would be the easiest way to find us is www.Qumran Records. So it's Qumran records.com. Pretty much everything minus the skull is going to be on that website, Divinity Compromise, Sacred Dawn, and plus all the other releases we have on there. And then Sacred Dawn is on all the social media platforms. The Skull and Legions of Doom, both of those are on all the social
Yeah,
platforms.
I'll tell you a funny story. I typed in the skull on like on YouTube just to look up some of the music videos, and you can imagine all kinds of stuff comes up.
Oh, I know. I
Yeah.
know. Yeah. So sometimes you have to be on as specific.
Specific as possible. That helps. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's movies and all sorts of things.
In
Yep.
fact, I know the late great Bob Kulick had a band named Skull. They released a couple albums. Was not a huge thing, but I was like, oh, yeah, that's definitely a metal name. And you've got a cool name, Lothar Keller. Lothar, I was curious, is that your stage name? Because it's a kind of
It's
a unique, original sounding name.
it's birth given.
Oh, wow, that's cool. That's even cooler.
Yeah, no, it was a name that my father, because he's German born, but he that was a name that he felt was a strong name to give. When I actually looked it up later in history, I found out, yeah, it's actually a warrior name. I was like,
Oh,
really?
that's cool. Like again, I thought, oh,
Awesome.
he made up a metal sounding name. I like that's
Yeah. And then what was funny is that I stumbled on this claymation. God, this was back in like 2007 or 8. And these guys from, I think, Southern California came up with this claymation. They called it Lothar, the King of Metal. And it's on YouTube. I don't know. It's, if you
Awesome.
want to go down that rabbit hole at some point, but it's hilarious. And there, I was like, hey, I wrote the guys like, it's kind of funny. But yeah, that's actually out there, and it was just kind of random.
Yeah,
So
I mean, one day, like maybe put out a solo album or something. Just call it Lothar. Hey, that's cool. That's metal
yeah,
sounding.
yeah, you never know. You never
Yeah.
know.
So, Joe, before you wrap it up for today, I just want to say to Lothar, I've really enjoyed talking to you and getting to know you. It's been a
Yeah, yeah.
pleasure. Anything else you want to ask him, Joe, before we wrap it up?
I think we pretty much covered everything. I wanted to find out new releases, shows, anything he's got coming up, and pipeline it out there the best we can, you know. So, and
Uh,
thanks for
Yeah,
coming on the show. We really appreciated having you as a guest, Lothar.
I
and,
appreciate you inviting me, man. That was
yeah, we got
awesome.
a couple more interviews to post first, but probably about a couple Mondays from now, this will be going up, and we'll let you know as soon as it does. Feel free to share it, and I mean it. As for the Sacred Dawn release coming out in September, let us
Yep,
know, and we'd love to have you back on and talk specifically about that. And any
that'd
of
be
your other
cool.
bands that are on your label, if they're looking for any free promotion, let them know about us.
All right. I got several. So,
Okay, take care, buddy.
all
Thank
right,
you.
man.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you.